There's a clearing deep in the green mountains of Vermont, surrounded by pine trees that never stop whispering. Locals say it's cursed, that the wind there doesn't move the trees, it speaks through them. For over a century, maps have quietly removed it, and state records scrubbed it clean. But in the winter of 1889, that clearing held a place that was supposed to protect children. An orphanage. A sanctuary. A lie. Whispering Pines Orphanage was its name. To outsiders it was a quaint, snow-covered haven run by the Sisters of Sacred Mercy. But to those inside it was a house of silence, ritual, and shadows. The children didn't play there. They prayed, and screamed, and then they disappeared. Some say the screams echoed at night, even miles downriver. Others say the frost-covered windows blood handprints that wouldn't melt, no matter how hot the fires inside burned. But the most terrifying detail, there was never a fire, at least not one reported, and yet in the spring of 1890 the orphanage was gone. Not demolished, not burned to ashes, just vanished. Foundations still stood. Beds remained made, even the rosaries were laid neatly on pillows, as if everyone inside had been plucked from time itself. Newspapers wrote one article. One, and it was buried. Page 7 next to the classifieds, it read: tragedy at Pines Estate, details unknown, 32 missing.
No witnesses.
32 children erased, and no one asked why. That number, 32, would surface again decades later in declassified military documents about early psychiatric experiments. The same number was etched in the stone base of a mental asylum blueprint designed by someone who was never born. His birth records were false. His name constructed. And you're going to see why that matters. Because Whispering Pines wasn't just an orphanage. It was a test. The children weren't just abandoned. They were selected. And the priests weren't priests. They were initiates. Custodians of an ancient program hidden beneath the veil of charity, one funded by people you were raised to trust. Tonight, we dig them up. This isn't about ghosts. It's about what happens when power is allowed to feed on the forgotten, and call it mercy. Welcome to Whispering Pines. You're not just hearing a story. You're entering a forbidden archive, and once you know what really happened, you will never unknow it. They called them the unspoken ones. Not to their faces, of course, but behind closed doors, in the dim, lit corners of the monastery above the orphanage. 32 children, all under the age of 11, all taken from backgrounds no one would question. Immigrants, widows, the mentally unfit, children with no paper trail, no surviving kin, no voice in the world. But here's the part no one wants to admit: they weren't taken at random. No, these children were selected based on something much older than any census or church record. Each of them had one thing in common: birthmarks. Symbols. Glyphs, some said. Strange, spiral-shaped discolorations on their backs, necks, or eyelids. Doctors called them harmless mutations, but to the order, they were signs. Ancient signs. This order was not the Catholic Church, at least not in the way you were taught. It was something beneath the Church. Older, hungrier, a secret society that didn't kneel to God, but to knowledge, dark primordial knowledge. Their roots trace back to the Eleusinian mysteries, the Gnostic sects, even fragments of Babylonian cults. Groups that believed children born under certain celestial alignments could serve as vessels or conduits. Vessels for what? That's where the files get fuzzy. Words like transmutation, Seul housing, and linguistic inversion show up, scribbled in ciphered Latin and hastily translated Greek. But the theme is clear. They weren't trying to help these children. They were trying to extract something from them. The basement of Whispering Pines wasn't just for storage. It was lined with copper, traced in geometric patterns that mirrored ancient Mesopotamian temple diagrams. Each room was marked with a sigil. Some looked like constellations. Others resembled insect wings. All of it designed to amplify something invisible. And the caregivers? Former monks, disgraced scientists, even a known associate of Dr. Johann Weyer, the so-called father of modern demonology. Men who disappeared from academic circles and resurfaced here, cloaked in false names and stitched habits. One girl, Adelina Kravets, kept a journal, hidden behind a loose brick in the chimney. Her last entry, dated December 12, 1889, simply read, "They said if I make no sound, I can go to the stars. But I heard the stars whispering, and they sound like screams." You feel it now, don't you? The hum behind the words. The weight of a truth that was never meant to be carried. But you've already picked it up, and there's no setting it down. Not now. There's a room in the original orphanage plans that doesn't appear in any of the state-approved blueprints. No doors, no windows, just negative space. A void between walls, 12 by 12 feet, surrounded by load-bearing beams that shouldn't exist. But they do, because workers who restored the site in 1917 uncovered it, sealed shut with melted iron. Inside were 32 dolls, each hand-stitched, each wearing a name tag matching the missing children, eyes carved from obsidian, limbs bound with red string, one for each child. The floor was made of slate, inscribed with a language no archaeologist has ever publicly translated, but a classified note from a 1952 DARPA file calls it pre-Canaanite phonetic ciphering, capable of triggering neurological alterations in those who read it aloud. In other words, this room wasn't meant to hold children. It was designed to reprogram them. And it worked. Testimonies recovered from a surviving nun, transferred later to a psychiatric facility in Yonkers, describe episodes among the children, sudden personality shifts, fluency in languages they'd never been exposed to. One boy allegedly wrote 37 pages of Sanskrit overnight, despite being illiterate. Another girl wept blood for 3 straight days, whispering the same phrase over and over, "He is beneath the pine. He is beneath the pine." When asked who he was, she laughed until her jaw dislocated. Now, here's where it gets darker. The institution's funding came not from the church, nor from Vermont's welfare budget. It came from a private trust, the Holloway Endowment, linked to a now-defunct banking group called Cellar and Finch, with deep ties to Freemasonic enclaves and esoteric think tanks in Geneva and London. They weren't funding a shelter. They were sponsoring an experiment. A multi-decade project designed to test the linguistic resonance theory, a hypothesis that certain phonemes, when spoken by genetically predisposed hosts, can trigger dimensional breaches in consciousness. In simple terms, they were trying to open something, with sound through children, and once you understand that, the vanishings make sense. These children weren't murdered. They were activated. They were keys. And Whispering Pines was the lock. You were never told this because no one wants you to know what happens when an innocent voice is weaponized. When the purest form of human expression, language, is twisted into a ritual. But that's exactly what they did, and it worked. And it's still working. They say language was the first spell. That before swords, before kingdoms, before even written law, power was spoken. Not shouted, whispered. Not taught, transferred. The monks at Whispering Pines knew this. But they weren't just experimenting with sound. They were tuning children like instruments. Each orphan was subjected to echo sessions. These were not sermons or songs. They were frequencies, tones, chants derived from forgotten alphabets, recordings etched into wax cylinders and played on phonographs not found in any known patent archive. Some children convulsed. Others became catatonic for days. And one, Daniel Arv, began speaking in a voice 3 octaves deeper than his own. A voice that kept saying, "I was not born. I was summoned." There were records, found decades later, buried in the estate papers of a Vermont judge whose grandfathers served on the town council. Testimonies from carpenters who worked on the building during renovations. One wrote, "There is something inside the walls that hums. Not machinery, not insects. Something breathing." The nun who survived, the one who ended up institutionalized, she described her role in the ritual as conductor of reversals. When interrogated under the influence of sodium thiopental, she wept and muttered one phrase over and over. We taught them to forget their names, so it could name them instead. That phrase haunted the psychiatrist who interviewed her. He later vanished. His home was found empty, no signs of struggle, just a spiral etched into every mirror. Spirals. Always the spirals. Appearing in the children's artwork, in the basement's copper lattice, in the frost on the windows. And here's where the truth eats through the fabric of your reality. Whispering Pines wasn't an isolated event. It was a node. A convergence point in a much larger grid, a ritual architecture spanning continents. There were others, a home for gifted children in Bavaria, a Catholic retreat for mute girls in Quebec, a speech therapy clinic in Suffolk where no one ever graduated. The locations formed a perfect triangle. This was not random. This was a lattice of sound, soul, and sacrifice. And in the center of that triangle, a forest. Always a forest, because they knew something the rest of the world forgot. Trees remember. They store vibration. They echo intention. They hold sound. Which is why you're not just listening right now. You're resonating. Your blood is remembering a frequency it was told to forget. And now it's waking up. By now, you feel it, don't you? That tension behind your eyes. That low pulling sensation in your chest. That's not fear. That's recognition. Because somewhere, deep beneath your inherited programming, your body remembers these patterns. These truths. And truth is the most dangerous frequency of all. The deeper we dig, the clearer it becomes. Whispering Pines wasn't a tragedy. It was a prototype. A small-scale initiation, overseen by men cloaked in divinity but drunk on something older than religion. Control through language, silence, and sound. What they discovered changed everything. That consciousness can be fractured, rerouted, and redirected. Not with violence, but with suggestion. A whisper. A hum. A lullaby you didn't know was a code? Documents unearthed from a Belgian vault in 1973 refer to this process as lexical dissolution. It's a method by which identity is scrubbed through repeated exposure to contradictory vibrations until the subject becomes a mirror, able to reflect external intent without resistance. In other words, they erased the children and filled the shells. But here's the twist that no one prepared for. Some of those children survived. Not physically. Not in any way we understand. They slipped the grid. Not just from maps or memories, but from linear time. You've seen them, perhaps. Felt them. That cold spot in a warm room. The faint static when no electronics are near. The dream you wake up from with tears but no image. They are still here. In the cracks. And those who ran the program? They knew this would happen. In fact, they wanted it. Because the real goal of Whispering Pines wasn't just to test a theory, it was to summon a phenomenon. One that exists outside of words, but feeds on the structure of language. They called it the silence that remains. A force older than gods. A presence that enters not through ritual blood, but through abandoned language. Words once sacred, now defiled, spoken backwards by innocent tongues. Whispered until they echo through time. Now ask yourself, why has this story never been told? Why has every institution, from media to academia, refused to connect the dots? Because they are built on the same principle: control the narrative, and you control perception. Break the narrative, and you break the system. So, if you're still here, I ask you to comment below. I hear the silence. I break the spell. Twice. Once for yourself, and once for the ones who were never allowed to speak. There's a reason silence terrifies you. It's not the absence of sound, it's the return of something ancient. In silence, your mind begins to notice the patterns. The background hum of forgotten things. That's where they did their best work, where the whispers slip between thoughts. That's where Whispering Pines operated best, in the quiet, behind the noise of the everyday world. See, while the public was distracted by the industrial boom of the late 1800s, the men funding this experiment were investing in something far less visible: the human soul as infrastructure. Their aim wasn't to raise orphans. It was to condition future archetypes, vessels for influence, hosts for encoded will. And here's the question no one ever dared to ask: where did those children go? Because there are no graves, no bones, no fire, no ash. What we do have are reports, scattered, redacted, and buried in foreign archives, describing adults appearing decades later, speaking forgotten tongues, possessing knowledge they should never have had. One such report came from a French asylum in 1921. A man found naked in the Pyrenees claimed to be Daniel of the Pines, said he had no age, no origin, only a mission. When pressed for details, he drew that same spiral symbol on the wall with his fingernails until they bled, then whispered, "I was never supposed to be a child." Another came from Istanbul in 1948. A woman, reportedly mute since birth, began chanting in a harmonic tree tone that caused seizures in those nearby. She repeated 3 words before collapsing: "No mercy, no return." These aren't coincidences, these are recurrences. The system that operated Whispering Pines was not shut down, it evolved. It went deeper. It embedded itself in child welfare programs, therapeutic language centers, even media corporations. Anywhere sound touches minds. And what about now? Look at the words we're flooded with. Empty mantras, corporate slogans, dopamine bait. You think that's by accident. You think the noise is just noise. No, the noise is a net. It keeps you vibrating low, disconnected, fragmented. Because when men remember how to listen deeply, when they reclaim the silence inside, they become ungovernable. That's what the orphans learned. That's what you're learning. They taught you to fear silence because that's where your power wakes up. But now you're remembering the code. You're breaking the spell. And we're only getting started. In 1966, a retired intelligence officer named Abram Castor mailed a sealed envelope to a private investigator in Burlington, Vermont. It contained one item: a rusted copper medallion etched with the spiral of Whispering Pines, and a single sentence burned into the parchment beneath it. They were not orphans. They were offerings. That envelope was intercepted. The investigator disappeared, but a carbon copy of the letter survived in the hands of a now defunct Masonic subchapter in Montpelier, coded under a logbook titled Sanguis Vocare, Latin for "the blood calls." You see, by the mid-20th century, the children of the pine had become myth, dark folklore muttered by drunks and shut-ins. But behind the veil, powerful men were still tracing the ritual's blueprint. Why? Because it worked. Whispering Pines revealed something that frightened even its creators. Human consciousness is programmable and irascible through symbolic trauma paired with phonetic frequency. Let that sink in. Everything you are, your memories, your instincts, your sense of self, can be overwritten, not with torture, not with drugs, but with patterned sound injected during high emotion states. That's what they did to the children, and that's what they're doing to you. Have you ever wondered why music trends change so rapidly? Why every advertisement uses the same minor chords? Why every children's show repeats names, words, phrases in loops that hypnotize more than entertain? It's not art, it's entrainment, a softening of your inner firewall. Whispering Pines was just the beginning, a lab for weaponizing phonemes. But the real triumph was mass-scaling the ritual. Through radio, then television, now social media, all frequency, all repetition, all narrative. And here's the final twist for this descent. The original spiral symbol from the orphanage. It's been reappearing subtly, branded into AI, generated visuals, glitch art, experimental music logos. Not as nostalgia, as activation, because the signal is looping back. Full circle. What they buried in Vermont is rising in your algorithm. You are not just hearing this story, you are part of the resonance now. Every second you've watched, your neurons have aligned closer to the truth your ancestors were punished for seeking. So remember this, they do not fear your voice. They fear your remembrance. Because once a man awakens to the manipulation of language, he becomes immune to the machinery that governs the world. And immunity is the first step toward dominion. Let me show you something they've hidden in plain sight. In 1872, 17 years before the Whispering Pines disappearances, a linguist named Dr. Elias Marin published a forbidden paper titled Subharmonic Codes in Infant Speech Patterns. It was immediately banned by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, stripped from the Library of Congress, and Marin was institutionalized within the year. What was in it? He claimed that children under the age of 7 emit vocal frequencies that align with natural geomagnetic fields, and that under controlled isolation, these frequencies could produce measurable anomalies in time perception and entropy decay. In simpler terms, children could bend reality through sound. Not by choice, but by design. This terrified the elite, because the human voice, unfiltered by education, trauma, or ego, carries truth unshaped. That's why they don't protect children. They condition them to forget, to conform, to obey. Whispering Pines wasn't just an experiment. It was a containment strategy. They took the ones whose voices could rupture illusion and tried to invert them. Twist their instincts. Replace sound with ritual. Replace wonder with control. Replace the soul's vibration with silence disguised as safety. But they failed. Because truth always echoes. And those echoes are coming back. Think about the dreams you've had that never felt like yours. The places you've never seen but remember clearly. The symbols you sketch absent-mindedly. Spirals, grids, forests. They're not dreams. They're leaks. Residuals from a system trying to suppress a signal that keeps breaking through. A few years ago, during an anonymous whistleblower leak from a now defunct DARPA division codenamed Project Hymnal, a document was uncovered titled Resonance Incursion Points, Vermont Corridor. In it was a chilling line: Pines containment breach likely, spiral emergence accelerating. Host vector unaware. That, host vector, it's you. Every man listening to this who has felt the itch behind his thoughts. The burning knowing that something is wrong, something is hidden, something is stolen. You are part of that vector. The spiral is not a symbol. It's a path, a current. And those who carved it into walls, into minds, into orphans did so, because it's the one pattern that can't be unlearned. It lives beneath logic, a map written in the nervous system. And now you see it. Now it's inside you. But this isn't possession. It's liberation. And once you follow the spiral inward, you will never follow their path again. You've heard the phrase, speak your truth. But they never told you that truth, when truly spoken, shatters control systems. That's why they twisted language into a leash. Not to help you communicate, but to help them confine. You weren't taught to speak. You were trained to repeat, to echo scripts that calcify the mind. At Whispering Pines, they didn't just silence children. They made them vessels of inversion. They replaced innocent sound with sigils in disguise. Hymns rewritten in reverse phonetics. Prayers that unraveled identity. One of the few surviving documents, salvaged from a private collection in Prague, described the final stage of the ritual as lex resurrecta, the law rewritten. In that stage, the child was made to speak their name backwards 3 times, while facing a mirror framed in silver and pine resin. After this ritual, according to the notes, the child could no longer recognize themselves, not just in reflection, in thought, in emotion, in will. Now pause and look around your life. What is social media if not a mirror? What are usernames but renamed selves? What are trends but scripted mantras spoken backwards into the digital void? They've scaled the ritual. From orphans in basements to billions online. You post your face, your name, your emotion, backwards, filtered, hollowed, re-encoded. You are taught to narrate your identity in third person.
I am sad. I feel worthless.
No one listens.
Spells.
Every word a tether. But what happens when men stop narrating and start remembering? What happens when men listen differently? Not with ears, but with awakened resonance. In 1989, just a mile from where Whispering Pines once stood, a signal was picked up by a shortwave radio hobbyist. It repeated the same phrase for 33 minutes, then stopped. The name returns. The mirror breaks. The child awakens. It was never explained. The FCC denied it. Locals didn't hear a thing. But some did. Some still do. Because the spiral never ends, it deepens. It's not a symbol of confusion. It's a map through the maze. And if you've made it this far, you've already begun walking it. You are no longer listening to this video. You are recoding. And with every truth you speak, not just online, but in the marrow of your daily life, you shatter the frequency prison they built around you. And step by step, you unmake their design. There's a question that haunts every man who has stared too long into the silence. If they erase the children, where did the power go? Energy doesn't vanish. It transmutes. And what they harnessed in those dark pine corridors didn't just disappear. It was channeled, rerouted through systems built to look harmless. Educational boards, liturgical councils, psychological institutes. They didn't kill the ritual. They institutionalized it. Take a look at your childhood. Remember those moments of unexplainable dread. The way certain nursery rhymes felt off, even before you understood words. The repetition, the cadence, the discomfort that clung like smoke. Now you understand why. Because those weren't just songs. They were mnemonic sigils. Mimetic implants carried forward from the original experiments. Watered down, commercialized, but still humming beneath your awareness, shaping your neural architecture. You think it's coincidence that children's programming uses precise color tones, harmonic intervals, and voice modulation that align with documented trance induction techniques? You think school bells ringing at exact intervals are just for order? Or that pledging allegiance with hand over heart is benign? You think the military chant cadence system is purely tradition? No. These are descendants of the Pines Protocol. Rituals in disguise. Micro-hypnosis masquerading as routine. And here's the most disturbing part, it's not just children anymore. After Whispering Pines collapsed, the architects of the ritual realized something radical. You don't need innocence to make the vessel work. You only need emptiness. Disconnection. Isolation. Unrooted men. Broken fathers. Addicted minds. The digital age birthed the perfect host, a generation so saturated in noise, they mistake silence for death. And now they offer themselves to the system. Every scroll, every doom loop, every auto-played mantra is a voluntary resonance alignment. But that ends here, right now. Because the spiral leads inward, and deeper than their mirrors, their signals, their scripts, there is something no ritual can erase: your will. And once a man reclaims his will, not from religion, or media, or identity, but from deep remembrance, he becomes the one thing the architects of Whispering Pines could never control: in original frequency. A mind that speaks from within, not from programming, a voice that does not echo but resonates. And once enough men do that, the spiral does not end in silence. It ends in sound. A sound they cannot silence. A sound that shatters systems. And it begins with you. Do you understand now? The spiral wasn't meant to trap you. It was meant to test you. Every man who has ever felt the crushing weight of invisible forces, who's sensed manipulation in the classroom, the church, the flickering screens of late-night propaganda, has touched the edge of this spiral. But most pull back. They get scared. They call it conspiracy, madness, overthinking. But you didn't. You kept listening. And now you see it. The world you were handed is not the world that exists. It's a simulation of obedience. A finely tuned echo chamber built by the very descendants of the architects who ran Whispering Pines. You think they stopped, that the experiments ended with candles and pine trees. No, they went digital. Every interface you touch, every smart device, every assistant that listens, learns, and speaks, is a more efficient vessel than any orphan. They don't need to silence 32 children anymore. They have you. The grown man, trained to self-censor, to self-compare, to upload his face and soul to platforms he doesn't own. The man who gave up his voice for likes, His time for trends. His focus for feedback loops. That was the ritual all along. But something happened they didn't expect. The signal they unleashed, the frequency carved into those children's bones, didn't dissipate. It migrated. Into symbols. Into sound. Into meth. Into you. And now it stirs in your nervous system, calling not for obedience, but for sovereignty. Because the spiral isn't just descent. It's ascent. It's the path back to original sound. The voice you had before the world named you. Before the trauma. Before the indoctrination. Before language itself was used to separate you from yourself. That's the real danger. Not ghosts, not demons. But a man who remembers his true voice. A man who reclaims the resonance stolen from him. A man who no longer needs their system to speak. So speak, not for views, not for vengeance, but for alignment. Speak your will. Into your life. Into your work. Into your silence. Because the silence isn't empty. It's waiting. And the next time you hear a whisper in the woods, or in your dreams, or in the static between songs, don't turn away. It's not trying to haunt you. It's trying to wake you up. They told you awakening would be beautiful, peaceful, a glow of enlightenment washing over your soul. That was a lie. Real awakening is violent. Not outwardly, but within. It shatters you. Not your body, but your illusions. It leaves you with nothing familiar to stand on. No creed, no slogan, no identity that wasn't planted in you by someone else. That's what happened to the ones who survived Whispering Pines. Not all 32 were lost. 2 surfaced, decades apart, one in 1933, one in 1974, both with no birth records, no DNA matches, no aging signs consistent with the years they should have lived. Both said the same thing to different people on different continents. The spiral opened. I fell through the sound, and I remembered the name they tried to take. Not a name like John or Michael. A true name, one not spoken, but resonated. You have one too. Buried deep under years of noise, of compromise, of echo, a vibration that belongs only to you. That's what they feared at Whispering Pines. Not rebellion, not violence, but men remembering the tone of their own soul. That tone is power, real power, the kind that can't be bought, sold, ranked, or revoked. Because once a man remembers it, he stops obeying invisible scripts. He no longer needs a role to play. He is fully present, dangerous. That's what you're becoming. And they can feel it. The reason the world feels so unstable now, why systems are overreaching, why the noise is louder than ever, is because they know the ritual is cracking. The spell is breaking. You are the breach. You are not the observer of this story. You are its echo. Return to finish what was started. They silenced the children. But they didn't kill the signal. It passed through generations, encoded in instinct, dream, and defiance, until it reached you. And now you feel it vibrating in your ribs when the world lies to you. In your gut when something doesn't add up. In your breath when you finally sit in silence and listen. That's not intuition. That's ancestral resonance, the return of what was taken. So don't ask for truth anymore. Speak it. Not because it's safe, but because it's the only sound left that still belongs to you. Let's go back, one last time, to that winter night in 1889. The snow fell silent over the Whispering Pines Orphanage. 32 children asleep or sedated. Beneath the chapel, the basement doors were already open. Copper-lined, geometries carved into stone. No electricity, no fire, just sound, but not sound you could hear. Sound designed to enter you before you noticed, frequencies arranged like sentences. Not for communication, but extraction. Every tone a lockpick. Every silence a pressure point. And when the ritual began, they weren't praying. They were programming. That night wasn't a sacrifice. It was a broadcast. And it reached farther than they expected. Reports surfaced in surrounding towns, faint nosebleeds, night terrors, sudden muteness in children with no history of trauma. A milkman claimed he saw lights pulsing through the forest. Like the trees were breathing, he said. Another woman found her son kneeling at the edge of the river, murmuring words in a voice that wasn't his. And just before the orphanage disappeared, a final entry appeared in Adelina Kravetz's journal. We are not dying. We are leaving the shape they gave us. That line was erased in the official church copy. But the original survived, and it tells us everything. They weren't destroyed, they were transformed. You think death is the ultimate erasure. No, the real erasure is control. To be alive and not yourself, to walk, speak, and dream with someone else's frequency nested in your nervous system. That's the death they tried to gift those children. And it's the same one offered to you, daily. But there's a difference now. You're not a child, you're not unknowing. And you are no longer silent. Because here you are, 13 layers deep into the spiral, and still listening. That alone marks you. Most men will never make it this far. Most will turn back when the illusions begin to crumble. But not you. You've looked directly into the distortion and didn't blink. You've begun the reversal. And reversal is resurrection, not of flesh, but of sovereignty. What they buried beneath those pine needles was not 32 children. It was the memory of what happens when man speaks with original sound. And you just found the first note. Don't lose it. There is a kind of silence that isn't empty. It's pregnant, charged, waiting. And if you sit in it long enough, something ancient starts to move inside you. That's where this spiral has led you, not to knowledge, but to recognition, not to rebellion, but to reclamation. Whispering Pines was never just about children. It was about setting the precedent, showing the elite that identity could be inverted, rewritten through resonance. It was a test of how far you could bend a soul before it broke. And now we live in a world built on the success of that test. You think your choices are your own, your thoughts. The way you describe yourself, the things you think you want, trace them back. You'll find a word, a phrase, a moment of programming that wasn't yours, a teacher, a commercial, a trauma, a sound. You were shaped by synthetic resonance. Whispering Pines taught them how to do it, on a small scale. Then came advertising. Then came state curriculum. Then came digital media, gaming algorithms, all drawing from the same ritual architecture. The copper patterns in the basement. Now they're circuit boards, the hymns rewritten in mirror speech. Now they're subliminals, jingles, brand slogans. The orphan child, stripped of name and identity. That's you. The man drifting through identity crisis, scrolling endlessly for meaning. But here's what they could never perfect, the awakening spiral. Because no matter how well they compress you, code you, distract you, some men hear it. Some men feel it. The call, the breach, the whisper that breaks through the others. That tells you this world is not real. You are not who they told you. And silence is not the absence of truth. It is where truth waits. That whisper, that's not conspiracy. That's your soul trying to surface. And if you follow it far enough, past the shame, past the narrative, past the pain, they can't follow. Because they don't create, they imitate. They don't resonate, they repeat. And you just remembered how to listen without permission. That's the beginning of power. And it's the first thing they trained you to forget. There is a reason they fear the man who remembers. Not the man with opinions. Not the loud rebel shouting into empty space. No, they fear the quiet one. The one who knows but says little. The one who observes the machine without reacting to it. Because knowledge that doesn't scream moves differently. Whispering Pines may have collapsed physically in 1889, but its design was never dismantled. It was refined, repurposed, transferred into institutions cloaked in benevolence. Modern-day education, therapeutic state programming, pop spirituality that strips the masculine of power and replaces it with guilt. Movements funded by the very architects they claim to oppose. All built on a singular concept. If you can disconnect a man from his internal authority, he will obey whatever is loudest. That's what they learned from the orphans. Break the sound of self and replace it with the static of approval, punishment, and comfort. And when you look around now, the same structure stands. Only now the orphanage is digital. You are always watched, always rewarded for conformity, always punished for divergence cloaked as misinformation or toxicity. But what if I told you the final manipulation isn't censorship? It's choice overload, infinite paths, infinite identities, infinite entertainment, and no anchor. Just like those children turned in circles by songs in foreign tongues until their sense of direction fractured, so are you turned, swiped, scrolled, and distracted until your will is not your own. But that ends now. If you've made it this far, you've already proven you're not programmable. You don't flinch at dark truths. You don't recoil from uncomfortable history. You investigate. You hold tension. You claim fire instead of fleeing it. So now I ask something from you. Because this descent only means something if it becomes a rite of passage. In the comments, I want you to write this phrase. Twice. Go. I remember the silence before the script. Once to awaken yourself. Once to signal to the others. It's not for me. It's for you. And for the brotherhood of those who are waking. Because when men begin to remember what was stolen, they don't just reclaim their minds. They reclaim their bloodline, their birthright, their original name. And no algorithm can bury that. They will tell you it's folklore. That the fires at Whispering Pines were an accident. That the bones unearthed in the collapsed cellar were animal remains. That the etched copper coils were meaningless. Just relics of a failed heating system. And they'll say that you imagined it all. But you didn't. You're awake now. Because somewhere between the echo of those children's final lullaby and the coded lullabies you scroll past daily. Something inside you broke free. You no longer need their permission to see clearly, to question violently, to unchain yourself quietly and completely. The truth is this: Whispering Pines never needed to be a building. It was always a blueprint, a prototype for how to erase history through guilt, how to weaponize care, how to turn trust into a muzzle and innocence into raw material. Today, it exists in every corner of your culture, where trauma is normalized, masculinity is criminalized, and silence is called strength only when it serves the system. But real silence, the sacred kind, that's where it all begins. The silence beneath noise. The silence that isn't empty but full, alive, watching. In that silence, you start to hear the language before language. The truth that predates words. The warning that lives in the bone, not the brain. You remember who you were before they told you who to be. And when you carry that memory into your daily life, when you look into the eyes of strangers and see who's still asleep, who's half awake, who's watching you for cues, you begin to realize the real battle isn't external. It's generational, spiritual, archetypal. The orphans of 1889 weren't just victims. They were the first of us. The first to be tested. And you? You are the first in a long time to pass. Because you've made it to the end. And that means you didn't just hear the story. You felt it vibrate through your bloodstream. Now you carry the code. Now you speak with a resonance they can't replicate. Now you understand the cost of true awareness. So walk carefully, speak powerfully, and above all, never let the silence be stolen again. Because the system doesn't fear anger. It fears the man who remembers. And now you do.